The airplane doors opened and the warm air of home touched her face. After so many years abroad, the smell, the sounds, even the sunlight felt different. She took a deep breath and smiled to herself. Finally, she was back. Her heart raced with excitement as she walked through the tunnel, holding her small suitcase tightly. It had been 5 long years since she last saw her family. She had been saving up, working day and night, just so she could come home and start fresh. As she stepped into the busy airport hall, people were rushing everywhere. Families reunited, couples hugged, and little kids ran around with laughter. She felt her chest tighten. She wanted that too. That warm hug from her mother, the teasing smile of her younger brother. She had kept her trip a secret because she wanted to surprise them. Her mother thought she'd be coming next month, but she had planned to walk into the house and say, "Guess who's home?" She rolled her suitcase toward the exit, humming softly. The announcements echoed in the background. Everything felt perfect, until she noticed 2 police officers standing near the exit. One of them, a tall man with sunglasses, was staring right at her. She didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just doing his job, watching people pass. But then, he whispered something to the other officer, a younger man with a serious face, and they both started walking toward her. She stopped, a little unsure. Maybe they needed help, or maybe it was a routine check. She smiled politely as they approached. "Good afternoon, officers," she said, trying to be respectful. The tall officer didn't smile back. "ID," he said flatly. She blinked in confusion. "Sorry?" "Your ID, passport now." "Oh, sure," she said quickly, opening her bag. "Is something wrong?" "Just show me your ID," the younger officer repeated. His tone was cold, sharp. She handed over her passport, still trying to stay calm. Her hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from the sudden tension in their voices. The tall one flipped through the pages and looked at her photo for a long time, then back at her face. "Where are you coming from?" "From Dubai," she said quietly. "I work there," he squinted. "Work doing what?" She hesitated, then said, "I was a flight attendant." That only seemed to make him more suspicious. He turned to his partner and muttered something she couldn't hear. The younger one stepped closer, scanning her luggage. "Is this your only bag?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said. "Just my clothes and gifts for my family. Mind if we take a look?" "Of course not," she said, trying to sound calm. "But can I know why?" Before she could finish, the tall one cut her off. "You match a profile. There's been an alert about someone coming in from your flight route. We're checking you for security reasons." Her heart dropped. "Me, a profile?" "Yes," he said sharply. "Don't act surprised." She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped when she saw people around her starting to stare. A mother pulled her child aside. A few travelers took out their phones. The officers unzipped her suitcase right there in the middle of the hall. Her neatly folded clothes spilled onto the floor. She felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Sir, please," she whispered. "There must be a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." "Quiet," the tall one barked. "We'll see about that." They searched through her belongings, her clothes, her small gifts, even her personal items, tossing them carelessly back into the suitcase. After several long minutes, they found nothing. The younger officer frowned, clearly annoyed that they hadn't uncovered anything suspicious. "Where's your phone?" he demanded. "In my hand," she said softly, lifting it slightly. "Give it here." She hesitated. "Can I ask why?" The tall one glared. "You're refusing to cooperate?" "No, I just put her in cuffs," he said suddenly. "What?" She stepped back in shock. "Wait, no. I didn't do anything." The crowd gasped. Someone said, "What's happening?" Another person shouted, "She didn't do anything." But the officers ignored them. The younger one grabbed her wrist and forced her hands behind her back. She could feel the cold metal bite into her skin. Tears filled her eyes. "Please, please," she cried softly. "This is a mistake." The tall officer spoke into his radio, saying something about a suspect detained. Her heart pounded so fast, she thought she might faint. Everything she had worked for, her job, her reputation, her peace, was slipping away in seconds. She could hear whispers from the crowd. Some people looked sorry, others judgmental. No one stepped forward. As they dragged her toward the exit, she noticed a young man filming on his phone. Their eyes met briefly. He looked angry, not at her, but at the injustice happening in front of him. She didn't know it yet, but that video would later become the first piece of truth in her fight for justice. The police car door slammed behind her. The noise made her jump. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight. "Please, officers," she said again. "I swear I've done nothing wrong." The tall officer didn't reply. The younger one drove silently, his jaw clenched. Through the window she could see the airport fading in the distance. The city lights blurred as tears filled her eyes. At the police station, they led her into a small gray room. A metal chair, a table, a flickering light overhead. They told her to sit. She obeyed. Her wrists hurt where the cuffs had been. "Start talking," the tall officer said. She swallowed hard. "About what? Who sent you?" "Sent me? I came home to visit my family." He leaned forward. "Don't play games. We know your name showed up on a list connected to smuggling. So who are you working for?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. "Please check again. There must be someone else with the same name." He smirked. "That's what they all say." The younger officer sat back, arms crossed. He looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The tall one continued to throw questions at her. Names, places, things she had never heard of. Every time she said she didn't know, he grew angrier. Hours passed. They left her alone in the room, without water, without her phone. She stared at the clock, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had never even gotten a speeding ticket before. Why was this happening to her? She thought of her mother, waiting at home. Her mother must be worried sick by now. She had planned to call from the airport. Her phone battery was low, and she couldn't remember her mother's number by heart. Panic filled her chest again. Suddenly, the door opened. The younger officer stepped in alone. He placed a paper cup of water on the table. "Here," he said quietly. "Thank you," she whispered. He hesitated, then said, "Look, I don't think you did anything. But my partner, he doesn't like being questioned." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Then please help me." "I'm innocent," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can't, not yet." "I'm sorry." He walked out, leaving her alone again. Her heart broke. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry. Instead, she sat there in silence, trying to stay strong. That's when she remembered something. A small voice in her head from a friend she had once worked with overseas. "If you ever feel unsafe, record everything." Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket. They hadn't taken her jacket yet. Her phone was still there, half dead, but working. She turned on the voice recorder and slipped it back inside. Moments later, the tall officer returned. He began questioning her again, but this time his words were harsher. He mocked her accent. He accused her of lying. Every cruel remark was captured on her phone without his knowledge. She stayed silent, tears rolling down her cheeks, but inside she made a promise. She would not let them destroy her. When the night ended, they left her in a holding cell. The cold air made her shiver. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. Outside, the world had no idea what had happened yet. But soon people would see the truth. The videos from the airport, the recordings from her phone. They would speak louder than anything she could ever say. And though she didn't know it that night, the same officers who dragged her away would one day stand before a judge, facing justice for what they did. But for now, she sat alone in that cold room, clutching the last bit of hope she had left, the belief that no lie could hide the truth forever. The sound of keys jingling woke her up. She didn't know how long she had been asleep, but her back hurt from the hard bench. The cell was small, gray, and cold. The light flickered every few seconds, making it hard to rest. Her eyes were swollen from crying and her head felt heavy. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then it all rushed back. The airport, the officers, the handcuffs. The door opened and one of the officers from last night walked in. It was the younger one, the one who had given her water. He didn't look directly at her. He said her name and told her to come with him. She stood slowly, her legs weak, and followed him down the hallway. They entered another small room. The tall officer was already there, sitting behind a desk, sipping coffee. His expression was calm but sharp. "So," he said without looking up, "ready to tell us the truth?" "I already told you everything," she said softly. He set his cup down and leaned forward. "You expect us to believe you came here for a visit? That's it? No hidden packages, no deliveries, no contacts waiting outside?" "Yes," she whispered. "That's all. I just came home." He gave a dry laugh. "You think we're stupid? Your name showed up in a file. It matches someone under investigation." She frowned. "Then it must be someone else with the same name." "Please check again." He slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me!" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. "I'm not lying." The room went silent. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Finally, the tall one stood up and walked out. The younger man sighed and looked at her. "You should just stay quiet for now," he said in a low voice. "Arguing won't help. How can I stay quiet when I'm being accused of something I didn't do?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment, then turned away. "Sometimes it's better not to fight," he said softly, almost to himself, before leaving the room. She sat there, feeling smaller than ever. The hours passed slowly. No one brought her food. No one told her what was happening. She tried to stay strong, but the loneliness was crushing. She thought of her mother again. Her mother must be calling her phone again and again. She imagined her brother checking the arrival boards at the airport, waiting to see her walk out smiling. The thought made her cry quietly. Late that afternoon, the door opened again. A different officer, one she hadn't seen before, told her they were transferring her to another facility for further questioning. She begged him to let her call her family, but he said, "You'll get your chance later." As they led her out, she saw the tall officer talking to someone in the hallway. He was laughing. She heard him say, "People like her always think they can talk their way out of trouble." His words cut deep. The van ride was long and silent. Through the small window, she saw the city pass by. Buildings, cars, people living normal lives. Everything looked so ordinary, yet she felt completely apart from it all. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Stay calm. The truth will come out." When they reached the second station, she was placed in another holding area. This one was cleaner but still cold. She was given a small blanket and a bottle of water. For the first time, she was allowed to use the restroom and wash her face. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired, but she noticed something else. A quiet strength in her reflection. She took out her phone when no one was watching and checked it quickly. It had only 5% battery left. She saw a few missed calls and one message from her mother that read, "Where are you? We're worried. Please call." Her eyes filled with tears again. She couldn't reply, not yet. But she checked the voice recorder. It had saved everything from last night. Every word, every insult, every cruel laugh. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular and put it back safely. That evening she was called in again. A man in a suit introduced himself as an investigator. His voice was calmer, not harsh like the others. He asked her to tell her story from the beginning. She told him everything: the flight, the officers, the search, the arrest, and the way they had treated her. He listened quietly, taking notes. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I'll look into this," he said, "but it may take some time." She looked at him hopefully. "Please, sir, I just want to go home." He gave a small sigh. "I understand. But until this is cleared up, we have to follow procedure." She wanted to scream, but she held it in. She simply said thank you and walked back to her cell. That night, she couldn't sleep. The noise of other cells, the clanking of metal doors, and the hum of the fluorescent lights kept her awake. She lay on her side, staring at the wall. Her heart ached for her family. She wished she could hear her mother's voice telling her everything would be okay. Meanwhile, outside those walls, something had started to happen. The young man who had filmed her arrest at the airport had posted the video online. It showed the officers pulling her suitcase apart, handcuffing her and dragging her away while she begged them to listen. Within hours, the video began to spread. People were shocked and angry. Some said it was another case of profiling. Others demanded an explanation from the police. The next morning, when she woke up, she noticed the officers whispering among themselves. Something had changed. The tall officer avoided looking at her. The younger one seemed nervous. She didn't know why, but she could feel that something was happening outside that she couldn't see. By afternoon, a new officer came to her cell. "You're being released for now," he said. She froze. "What?" "You're free to go. There's been a review." He didn't explain further. Her hands trembled as she gathered her things. Her passport, her phone, her small suitcase that had been tossed around. As she stepped outside, the bright daylight stung her eyes. Reporters were waiting near the gate. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted her name. She was overwhelmed. One reporter asked, "Do you have any statement about what happened?" Another said, "How do you feel about the viral video?" She stared at them in confusion. "Viral video?" she whispered. Then she saw it. A woman nearby was holding up her phone, showing the video that had spread across the internet. It was her, standing at the airport surrounded by officers pleading for fairness. The comments were filled with outrage and support. People were calling her brave, innocent, and unfairly treated. Tears rolled down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. Not from fear, but from relief. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Her family rushed to meet her at the gate. Her mother held her tight and refused to let go. Her brother hugged her, his eyes red from crying. "We saw the video," he said softly. "Everyone saw it. You didn't deserve that." She held them both and whispered, "It's over now." But deep down, she knew it wasn't really over. The officers had humiliated her, accused her, and treated her like she was less than human. She couldn't just forget that. That night, as she lay in her own bed for the first time in days, she replayed the recording from her phone. Every cruel word echoed through the small room. She felt her anger rise, not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted justice. She knew now that people were watching, that truth had started to come out, but she also knew the system would try to protect its own. She had a decision to make, either stay quiet and move on or speak up and fight back. Her mother came into the room and sat beside her. "You don't have to go through this again," she said gently. "Just rest." She nodded, but her eyes were determined. "I can't let it happen to someone else," she said quietly. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, then took her hand. "Then we'll stand with you," she said. Outside, the city slept peacefully. But inside that small house, something powerful had begun. A quiet promise to stand up for truth, no matter how long it took. She looked out the window at the stars and whispered to herself, "They thought they could silence me. But they were wrong." The morning sunlight streamed through the window, but she didn't feel its warmth. She had barely slept. Even though she was home, her mind kept going back to that cold room, those harsh voices, and the sound of handcuffs clicking around her wrists. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces, the tall officer's glare and the younger one's silence. Her mother knocked softly on the door. "You should eat something," she said gently, setting down a tray with breakfast. She forced a small smile. "I'm not really hungry." Her mother sat beside her. "I know you're hurting, but the world knows what they did. You don't have to prove anything now." She shook her head slowly. "It's not about proving something anymore. They treated me like I was nothing. If I stay quiet, they'll do it again to someone else." Her mother sighed. "Then what will you do?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, staring out the window. "But I can't pretend like nothing happened." Later that day, her brother came into the room with his phone in his hand. "You should see this," he said, showing her a news clip. The video of her arrest had now been played on every major news channel. Reporters were discussing how unfairly she had been treated. Civil rights groups were demanding an investigation. There were even peaceful protests forming outside the police department. She watched the clip in silence. The moment when the officer grabbed her bag replayed over and over. She could hear herself saying, "Please, this is a mistake." It made her stomach twist, but it also fueled something inside her. Strength. Her brother said softly, "People are on your side. Maybe it's time to speak up." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but I want to do it the right way." The next morning, she visited a local law firm that had reached out to her through social media. A kind woman greeted her and introduced herself as a lawyer who handled discrimination and unlawful arrest cases. She listened carefully as she told her everything, from the airport encounter to the time in the holding cell. When she mentioned that she had an audio recording, the lawyer's eyes widened. "You recorded them?" "Yes," she said. "By accident at first, but it captured everything. Their insults, the way they treated me, all of it." The lawyer leaned forward. "That's very important. It could change everything." For the first time in days, she felt hope. The lawyer explained that they could file a formal complaint against the officers and also take legal action against the department. But, she warned, it won't be easy. The department will try to protect them. They might say it was a misunderstanding or part of their duty. She looked the lawyer in the eyes and said firmly, "Then I'll fight. I'm not scared anymore." Word spread quickly. The media followed every update. People online started sharing messages of support. Strangers sent her letters and emails thanking her for standing up. Some shared their own stories of unfair treatment, saying her courage gave them strength. Still, not everyone was kind. There were also people who doubted her. Some said she was exaggerating. Others claimed the officers were just doing their job. She read those comments late at night, and though they hurt, she refused to respond. She told herself that truth didn't need to shout, it just needed to stand firm. The first hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. The morning of the hearing, she stood outside the courthouse with her family and lawyer. Reporters surrounded them, microphones everywhere. One of them asked, "Do you think justice will be served?" She looked at the crowd, her heart pounding, and said simply, "I believe the truth will speak for itself." Inside the courtroom, the two officers sat across the room. The tall one looked confident, almost arrogant, as if nothing could touch him. The younger one looked nervous, avoiding her eyes. The lawyer began by presenting the video clips taken by witnesses at the airport. The judge watched silently as the footage played on a large screen. The sound of her pleading filled the courtroom. You could see the way the tall officer had grabbed her arm, the way the crowd had shouted that it wasn't fair. Then came the most important part, the audio recording. The lawyer handed it over as evidence. When the judge pressed play, the room grew completely silent. The voices were clear. The tall officer's words were cruel and mocking. He had laughed while accusing her of lying, insulted her accent, and said things that made the entire courtroom shift uncomfortably in their seats. The younger officer's voice was heard too, quieter, but complicit in his silence. By the time the recording ended, the judge's face had changed. He looked stern, disappointed, and deeply disturbed. The department's lawyer tried to argue that the recording had been taken without consent and that the officers had acted under standard procedures. But it was clear that their defense was crumbling. The evidence spoke louder than any excuse. After the session ended, reporters waited outside again. Cameras flashed as she walked out with her lawyer. People cheered from across the street. Someone shouted, "We're proud of you," and she couldn't help but smile for the first time in days. That evening, she sat at home scrolling through messages. One caught her eye. It was from the young man who had filmed the video at the airport. He had written, "I saw what happened that day. I couldn't stay quiet. I'm glad you're fighting back." She felt grateful. That stranger's courage had helped expose the truth. In the days that followed, more stories surfaced. Other travelers came forward saying they had faced rude or unfair treatment from the same officers. Some had even filed complaints in the past, but nothing was done. Now those voices were finally being heard. The department tried to calm the public by saying they had temporarily suspended the officers while the investigation continued. But people weren't satisfied. They wanted accountability, not excuses. One afternoon, while she was meeting her lawyer again, a journalist approached her for an interview. He asked, "When they arrested you, what was the first thing that went through your mind?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I kept asking myself, why me? I was polite, I followed every rule, and still I was treated like a criminal. That's when I realized, sometimes the problem isn't what you do, but what people see when they look at you. And that needs to change." Her words went viral again. People shared clips from the interview everywhere. Her calmness and grace touched many hearts. She wasn't angry or loud. She spoke with quiet strength, and that made people listen even more. Weeks later, the lawyer called her with news. "The Internal Affairs Department has completed its report," she said. "They've confirmed serious misconduct. There will be another court session soon, and this time it's not just about clearing your name, and it's about holding them accountable." She felt a wave of relief, but also a sense of responsibility. She knew this wasn't just her story anymore. It was about every person who had ever been mistreated and silenced. The night before the next hearing, she sat on her balcony with a cup of tea. Her mother joined her quietly. They looked at the stars, both lost in thought. Her mother finally said, "I never wanted you to go through this, but I'm proud of the way you handled it. You didn't let anger change you." She smiled softly. "If I let hate guide me, then they win. I just want fairness." Her mother reached over and held her hand. "You've already made a difference." She didn't reply, but deep inside, she hoped that was true. The next morning, she walked into the courtroom again, calm, strong, and ready. The officers avoided her gaze this time. The tall one looked nervous now. The younger one sat quietly, his face pale. The judge began by reviewing the final report. It confirmed that the officers had abused their power, conducted an unlawful arrest, and shown bias. The judge's voice was firm when he said, "No one is above the law." The hearing ended with both officers formally charged. The crowd outside erupted in applause as she stepped out. Reporters surrounded her once more, asking how she felt now that justice was moving forward. She paused for a moment and said softly, "I'm grateful. But this isn't just my victory. It's a reminder that we all deserve respect, no matter who we are or where we come from." Her words echoed across news outlets that evening. People everywhere began talking more openly about fairness, equality, and courage. She had started something much bigger than herself, and though she didn't plan it, she had become a voice for many who couldn't speak up. That night, as she sat with her family, her mother turned to her and said, "You see, the truth always finds its way out." She smiled, finally feeling at peace. "Yes," she said softly, "and this is only the beginning." Days turned into weeks, but the story didn't fade away. What happened to her had started as one woman's nightmare, but now it had become something much bigger. Every day, new headlines appeared. News anchors talked about the woman who stood up for justice. Social media was filled with people sharing her story, calling her brave and strong. Some said she had changed the way they looked at things. She never asked for any of that attention. All she wanted was fairness, yet the whole country seemed to be watching her now. Every time she went outside, people recognized her. Strangers would come up and say, "We're with you," or "Stay strong." Some would even bring small gifts, flowers, letters, or notes that simply said, "Thank you for speaking up." It was strange for her. Just a few weeks ago, she had been invisible, one person among millions. Now everyone knew her name. She didn't feel like a hero. She was still the same person who had been scared and crying in that cold room. But seeing how her story inspired others made her realize how powerful truth could be. One morning, she sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea while her mother scrolled through her phone. "You're on the news again," her mother said with a proud smile. "They're talking about the case." She smiled faintly. "I just hope they're telling the truth this time." "They are," her mother said. "They even interviewed people from your flight. They said you were calm, polite, and respectful. Everyone saw it wasn't your fault." That made her eyes water a little. It felt good to know that people had seen what really happened. A few days later, her lawyer called and said, "There's been progress. The internal department's investigation has finished. They've confirmed several violations of protocol." She took a deep breath. "What does that mean?" "It means we're closer to getting justice," the lawyer replied. "There's enough evidence to take this case to trial. It won't be easy, but the truth is on your side." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how everything had unfolded, from stepping off the plane full of joy to being dragged away like a criminal. And now here she was preparing to face the same people in court again, but this time, she wasn't afraid. The next morning, she met her lawyer to go over the details. The woman explained that the trial would begin in a few weeks. The officers' lawyers would likely try to defend them, maybe even twist the story, but she shouldn't lose faith. "We'll show the video, the recording, and witness statements," the lawyer said. "It's all there," she nodded quietly. "I'm ready." In the meantime, she tried to live normally. She went on walks, helped her mother with chores, and spent time with her younger brother. But no matter what she did, she couldn't escape the memory of that day. Sometimes, when she passed by the airport on her way into the city, she felt her chest tighten. The place that once meant homecoming now reminded her of pain. One afternoon, while she was walking through a park, a little girl ran up to her with her father. The man smiled and said, "My daughter wanted to meet you. She said you're her hero." The little girl held out a small drawing. It was a picture of a woman standing tall with a caption that said, "Be brave." She bent down and smiled warmly. "Thank you, sweetheart. You be brave too, okay?" Moments like that gave her strength. As the trial approached, the media attention grew even stronger. People camped outside the courthouse. Activists held signs that said, "Justice for all." It was overwhelming, but her lawyer told her to focus only on telling the truth. The day of the trial, the courtroom was full. She sat beside her lawyer, her family behind her for support. Across the room sat the two officers. The tall one still tried to look confident, but there was something different about his face this time. His arrogance had faded. The younger one looked down, avoiding everyone's eyes. The judge entered and everyone stood. The hearing began. Her lawyer started by describing what had happened, how a woman was unfairly targeted and humiliated for no reason. She presented the video again, then played the audio recording. Every word filled the room. The tall officer's voice, his mocking laughter, and his cruel remarks echoed off the courtroom walls. It was painful for her to listen to, but she didn't look away. She wanted the world to hear the truth exactly as she had lived it. The officer's lawyer tried to defend them, saying they were following orders and mistook her identity. But the judge interrupted sharply. "Mistaken identity does not justify this kind of behavior," he said sternly. "Their tone, their language, their actions, and none of it fits protocol." When it was her turn to speak, she stood up slowly. Her hands trembled a little, but her voice was steady. She told the judge everything, how she had just landed after years away from home, how happy she had been before everything turned upside down, how it felt to be treated like she didn't belong. "I wasn't angry at first," she said softly. "I was confused. I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But the way they looked at me, the way they talked to me, it wasn't about rules or safety. It was about something else. They didn't see me as a person. They saw what they wanted to see." The courtroom was silent. Some people in the audience wiped their eyes. Her words were simple, but they carried more power than anything else that day. After she finished, the judge thanked her and said, "You showed great strength by staying calm and standing up for what's right." When she sat down, her mother reached forward from behind and squeezed her hand. The next few days of the trial were long. Witnesses testified, airport staff, passengers, and even a junior officer from the same department who admitted that the two had been warned before for unprofessional behavior. Piece by piece, the truth unfolded, finally. After days of testimony, the judge announced that the court would issue its final decision soon. Outside, the crowd cheered as she walked down the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, but she didn't stop. She simply smiled and said, "I trust the truth." That evening, her lawyer visited their home. They sat around the dining table as she opened a folder filled with documents. "We're almost there," the lawyer said. "I believe the verdict will go in your favor. The evidence is undeniable." Her mother placed her hand over her daughter's. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you," she said softly. She smiled through tears. "Thank you, Mama, I just want this to end." But before it ended, something unexpected happened. The younger officer, the one who had stayed silent through everything, requested to meet with the investigators again. Word soon spread that he had agreed to testify honestly about what happened. During his final testimony, he admitted that he knew she was innocent from the start, but didn't have the courage to speak up against his partner. His voice trembled as he said, "What we did was wrong. She didn't deserve it. None of it." The courtroom was stunned. For the first time, the truth came from inside the department itself. A few days later, the final hearing took place. The judge read his decision slowly, every word echoing through the silent room. He declared that both officers were guilty of misconduct, abuse of authority, and wrongful arrest. They were stripped of their positions and sentenced according to the law. Tears filled her eyes as the judge said, "No one is above justice." This case is a reminder that power must always come with responsibility. Her family hugged her tightly. People in the courtroom clapped softly in respect. She didn't smile out of victory. She smiled out of relief. Outside, the crowd was waiting again. The news spread instantly. The officers had been found guilty. Reporters surrounded her, asking what she wanted to say. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "Justice doesn't erase what happened, but it gives hope to everyone who's been hurt and stayed silent. I just want to live in a world where no one is treated differently because of who they are." The cameras flashed. People cheered and her mother's eyes shone with pride. That night, as she sat in her room, the air finally felt lighter. The nightmare that had started at the airport was over. She opened her window and looked at the stars. Somewhere deep inside, she felt peace for the first time in months. But she also felt something else. Purpose. She knew that this wasn't just about her anymore. What happened had opened people's eyes, and she wanted to make sure the change didn't stop there. As she lay down to sleep, she whispered to herself, "The truth won today, but there's still more to do." And with that thought, she closed her eyes. Finally free, finally home. After the trial ended, the house felt quiet again. No reporters outside. No endless phone calls. For the first time in months, the world wasn't watching her every move. The silence felt strange at first, but it was a kind of peace she had been waiting for. She spent her mornings sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunlight move slowly across the yard. Her mother would hum softly while hanging clothes to dry, and her younger brother would leave for school waving goodbye. Everything looked normal again, yet she knew she was no longer the same person who had stepped off that plane months ago. She had seen both the worst and best sides of people. She had seen cruelty and kindness, fear and courage, ignorance and truth, all in one story. One afternoon, she walked to a small cafe near the town square. It was quiet inside, just a few people reading or working on their laptops. She ordered coffee and sat by the window, staring at the busy street. She overheard a group of students at the next table talking about her case. "That woman really changed things," one of them said. "They're starting new training at the station because of her." The others nodded. She looked down at her coffee and smiled faintly. It felt strange hearing people talk about her like that, but deep down it made her realize that what happened wasn't just a personal victory. It had started something bigger. A week later, her lawyer called. "There's something I want to discuss," she said. "A few organizations are reaching out." "They want to meet you." "Meet me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, they help people who faced similar situations. They think you could inspire others." At first, she hesitated. She didn't see herself as a speaker or a leader. She was just someone who had gone through something painful and stood her ground. But the more she thought about it, the more she felt it might help others, people who were too scared to speak up. The next week, she agreed to meet them. The meeting took place in a small community center filled with warm light and friendly faces. There were people from different backgrounds, students, mothers, travelers, and workers, all gathered to talk about equality and justice. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the front of the room and looked around nervously. Her palms felt sweaty and her voice trembled at first. "I'm not a public speaker," she began softly. "I'm just someone who wanted to go home and ended up learning how powerful truth can be." The room grew quiet. Everyone listened closely. She told them how scared she had been that day, how helpless she felt, and how, even in fear, she knew she couldn't stay silent. "I didn't fight because I wanted fame or revenge," she said. "I fought because I didn't want anyone else to go through what I did." By the time she finished, several people were wiping their eyes. After the meeting, a young woman approached her and said, "Your story gave me courage. Something similar happened to my brother, but we never knew how to speak up. Now I know it's possible." That night, as she walked home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. In the following months, she started working with a local awareness group. They visited schools, community centers, and small towns talking about fairness and respect. She wasn't paid for it, but it didn't matter. Seeing others gain strength from her story was worth more than money. Her lawyer also encouraged her to write about her experience. "People need to read your words," she said. "You could reach so many more." At first, she didn't know where to start, but one rainy evening, she sat by her window with a notebook and began to write. She wrote about fear, confusion, and pain, but also about courage, hope, and healing. She didn't try to make it sound perfect. She just wrote the truth. When she finished, she showed it to her lawyer, who shared it online. Within days, thousands of people read it and left comments like, "This touched my heart, and thank you for sharing this." Messages poured in from people around the world, from strangers who said her story gave them the strength to believe in justice again. Months passed, and her life began to find rhythm again. She got a small part-time job at a travel office, helping others plan their trips. Every time someone came in smiling and talking about flying home, she felt both happiness and a quiet ache. Airports would always remind her of what happened, but she refused to let that memory take her peace. One day, she received an invitation to speak at a larger event in the city. It was organized by human rights advocates and attended by hundreds of people. She hesitated at first. Big crowds still made her nervous, but her mother encouraged her gently. "You've already walked through fire," she said. "Speaking won't burn you." She smiled at that. So she went. The hall was full when she arrived. People clapped as she stepped onto the stage. Bright lights made it hard to see faces, but she could feel the warmth and energy of the audience. When she began speaking, her voice was calm and steady. I once thought my life had been destroyed, she said. But sometimes pain becomes the seed of something better. She talked about forgiveness, and not because what happened was okay, but because she didn't want anger to live inside her forever. She explained how she learned that real change starts with compassion, not hate. The audience listened silently, and when she finished, they gave her a long standing ovation. Tears welled in her eyes as she bowed her head in gratitude. After that event, she began getting invitations from other cities. She didn't accept all of them. She didn't want to turn her life into a public show. But she did choose the ones that felt meaningful. Slowly, she became a quiet voice for fairness. Not loud, not famous, but steady. People respected her because she spoke from experience, not ego. Then one day, she got a call from a small foundation that wanted to partner with her to start a project. They wanted to create a fund to support victims of false accusations or unfair treatment. "We'd like to name it after you," the woman on the phone said. She was taken aback. "After me?" "Yes," the woman said. "Because you remind people that courage can be quiet but powerful." After thinking about it for a few days, she agreed, but on one condition. "I don't want it to be about my name," she said. "I want it to be about hope." So the foundation launched a new program called the Hope Path, dedicated to helping people rebuild their lives after injustice. It started small, helping 1 or 2 people at a time, but it grew quickly. She spent her days meeting with people, helping them find lawyers, emotional support, and the strength to move on. Each story reminded her of how fragile people could be and how strong they could become. Sometimes she'd return home late and sit on her porch again, watching the stars. Her mother would join her, carrying 2 cups of tea. They'd sit in silence for a while before her mother would say softly, "You've turned pain into something beautiful." She would smile and reply, "I just didn't want it to end with me." One evening, a message arrived from the younger officer, the one who had confessed during the trial. He wrote that he was serving his sentence and trying to rebuild his life. His letter said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I learned more from your strength than from any punishment." She read it twice before folding it quietly. She didn't reply, but she forgave him in her heart. Holding on to anger, she realized, was like carrying a heavy stone. Letting it go made her lighter. A year later, she stood again at the same airport where everything began. This time, she was there to travel. Not to escape, but to speak at a conference overseas. She stood in the same hall, watching people hurry past with suitcases and laughter. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like she had reclaimed it. A reminder that no matter how dark a chapter begins, it can end in light. As her plane began to board, she smiled at the announcement and whispered to herself, "This time I'm leaving free." And she walked forward. Not as a victim anymore, but as a woman who turned her pain into power, one small step at a time.